yay, man. All out of options, nothing to choose. I pissed out on Netflix, I'm sick of the news. I'd sign up to Sky, but I don't wanna pay. I've been on furlough since May. Never go and listen to a Cockney attitude. Ooh, breaking away. Got to find a better way. I'd rather watch Auf Wiedersehen again and listen to what these old men have to say.
Hello, and welcome back to Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast. And this is episode number 12.
Hey.
Guten Tag.
Guten Tag.
So, yes, this is episode number 12 of Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast. And it is me, your genial host, Mr. Andy Sledge, and my co-host and partner in crime, Mr. George Bradley, all the way from the Big Smoke. So, George, looks like the sun is shining through your window there. Looks like a lovely day in London. How are you on this fine day?
Yeah, I'm good. I was out this morning. I had to go somewhere this morning, so was out pretty early. It's still too cold to sit outside the pub, so I think I'll wait till next week.
Yeah, pretty much, basically. So, so apart from your little jaunt out into the world this morning and not sitting outside of pubs, has there been anything exciting in the world of your fucking life this week?
Not really. I was thinking maybe going to Cornwall next week for a few days, but I think everyone's had the same idea. I mean, trying to book somewhere is just it's impossible. I wanted a little cottage or something, but I was going to go to St. Ives, and like the nearest one, we got one. It's 6 miles away. I mean, forget it. So if I can't get a B&B, I just won't bother going. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think staycations have been severely booked up in advance, and so there's a mate of mine's getting married in July.
Yeah,
and he's like they're doing it this wedding venue out in the countryside in Oxfordshire. And it's like a campsite, right? And they were like, you can pitch a tent. And I was like, yeah, I'm not like, look, I'm fucking 45 this year and I'm a big fella. I don't fucking sleep in tents. And so I thought, I'll get a camper van. I'll hire a camper van.
I've seen that. I've seen you were looking for that.
Yeah. Fucking only one I could find. Geezer wanted 800 quid for 2 days. I was like, I could probably go and fucking buy one, like an old shitty one for 800 quid. But Geezer wanted 800 quid. So I just replied. I was like, have you been smoking crack, mate? You know what I mean? 800 quid for basically £400 a night for a 2-bed camper van. I was like that. Yeah, absolutely off your nut. Yeah. So anyway, eventually I got a nice hotel booked. It's about 8 miles away from the venue, but obviously I don't drink, so it doesn't bother me. I'll just I paid like it was like one of these, sort of country pub kind of hotels. 80 quid a night. So I got like 2 nights there for like 160 quid. Yeah. And like I say, this prick wanted 800 quid for a fucking camper van. I'm like, you're off your nut, aren't you? So yeah, I mean, absolutely craziness. But apart from that, again, very little going on. I've been boxing a few times, trying to get back in the swing of things.
Yeah, I've seen that, yeah.
Bit of a sore shoulder, so I didn't actually go training last night. I fucking went for so I've had this sore shoulder, I've been getting physio on it, and then I went for a massage, and the fucker, it was like that, digging the elbow into my shoulder, and it was properly painful. And I thought, it's doing it good. And then I woke up yesterday, I was like, oh, you're like, yeah, proper in agony. So
not like the old time massages of past.
No. It wasn't like that, no. This was a legit massage.
All right.
Anyway, so I felt it was real sore yesterday. But it feels a bit better today. But so hopefully by tomorrow it will be okay. Apart from that, very little. So having over the weekend, we went training. ate some nice food, and that is about the size of it. So yes. So anyway, if you or our viewers or listeners have anything interesting that you would like to share with us, you can please do so via email, and you can email us here, me or George, at the podcast at Auf Wiedersehen Again @gmail.com. That's Auf Wiedersehen Again @gmail.com. We would please encourage you to follow us on our social media platforms. Instagram, which is at Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast. Instagram at Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast. Twitter is at Auf Again. That's Twitter at Auf Again. Please do like and share the Facebook page, which is Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast. And if you are watching on YouTube, then we would encourage you to subscribe to the YouTube channel and click the bell, which will alert you to any new episodes that come out. If you are just listening on audio, then please, at some point in the future, do find the time to go to YouTube and search for the YouTube channel, which is Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast. And like I say, please do subscribe and click that bell. And like I say, for audio, we are available on all good podcast platforms: Spotify, iTunes, Anchor, Google Podcast, Breaker, and many, many more. So new episodes are released every Friday at 10 a.m. The music, our theme music, as always, composed and performed by the guitar man, Mr. Lee Dosky. So please, please, please do like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And as always, we are sponsored by Top Gun Tattooing of number 12, the Harris Arcade in Reading. Their website is topguntattoo.co.uk, and their phone number is 01189 968 667. So we have a couple of fantastic offers for the listeners of our podcast. Offer number one is you can get a 20% discount off any tattoo by speaking to Zach, and the code word to acquire your tattoo, your 20% discount is Hadaway and Shite.
Hadaway.
So yes, if you contact Zach either in person at the studio or by telephone and say, Zach, I am a listener of Auf Wiedersehen Again podcast, Hadaway and Shite Man, and you will get a 20% discount off your tattoo. But remember our world-beating offer of a free tattoo, the only podcast in the world that offers free tattoos. Terms and conditions apply. So the terms and conditions are, we offer a free Neville and Lottie tattoo for every listener. So if you want a free tattoo, as long as it is the Neville and Lottie tattoo sported by Neville, we will pay for it, film it, photograph it, and broadcast it across the world. So if you want a free tattoo, please contact us by email of wiedersehenagain@gmail.com. And obviously you won't be the first one, because George is going to get his free tattoo, aren't you, George?
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because if you were going to go to Cornwall, you'd have to come through Reading on the way, wouldn't you?
Right, yeah.
So
makes sense, yeah.
And the tattoo studio is just over the road from the train station. So what you can do is you can stop at Reading, jump off the train, get your free tattoo, and then carry on your holidays. How does that sound?
Well, neck a few in the pub first, obviously.
Well, there you go. Look, I mean, we're very, very much. We're getting closer by the weeks. As the weeks count down, we're getting closer to you getting your Neville and Lottie tattoo. And speaking of free stuff, we are still running our giveaway. So we are in the midst of the giveaway for the Jimmy Nail autobiography, A Northern Soul. So if you would like to win this fantastic book, all you have to do is be a follower of us on the social medias, and there are posts on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You need to go to the post. You need to follow us on that social media channel. You need to go to the post. You need to like the post. You need to tag 3 of your friends in the comments, and then you need to share that post. So on Facebook, just share it to your newsfeed. On Twitter, just retweet it. And on Instagram, share that post to your story and tag us in the share, and we will then know that you have done it. And it is unlimited entry. Every time you tag 3 friends, you are increasing your chances of winning this fantastic prize. So don't hang around. Go to the social medias and get entering, and you too could be a winner. So there we go, all of the boring stuff out the way. So this week we are breaking down series 1, episode number 12, Love and Other 4-letter words. Now again, I would say one of my favorite episodes, but one of the episodes that I have seen the most of, because again, one of the ones we had on video when I was a kid. So I remember watching this episode quite a lot. And it was first broadcast on the 3rd of February in 1984. And we have a very, very, very special guest star who we are going to talk about when she appears.
A very saucy guest star.
Absolutely, John. And again, we will discuss that when she appears. I was I tell you what, I was very, very, very impressed with that WhatsApp message that you sent me yesterday, John.
Yeah. There's quite a few bits and pieces about her. I mean, yeah, she's quite interesting girl, as well as being very pretty.
Exactly. So we the episode starts, as do many, in the hut, and Barry and Oz are sort of clearly running late, and Barry starts shouting. He's like, "Oz, wake up, Oz!" And he goes, "Look, it's 22." So that must be 20 to 9 or 20 to, yeah, probably 20 to 9. Yeah. And Oz is asleep, and he's dressed in his usual regalia of his white Y-fronts and vest. And Oz is woken up, and he's not too happy. He's like, I was just having a lovely kip there, man. And Barry's looking for a sock. He's like, I can't find me bloody sock. And then so Oz begins to regale Barry with the contents of his dream. He says, I've just had this fantastic dream, man. He goes, whoa, really horny it was. There was this gorgeous bird in it. You know, she spoke with a French accent. Well, definitely foreign.
Definitely foreign.
Now, obviously, Barry is, not listening. Barry's concentrating on trying to find its sock. And he's talking away to himself. He's like, it was in me boot. I know it was in there. And Oz, unperturbed by his lack of audience, and he says, and she had one of them transparent negligees on, the sort you see in the window of C&A. Now, this may seem a stupid question. I don't think C&A doesn't exist anymore. But did you have C&A down here?
Yeah. It was a big,
not just a
main shop. Thing. Yeah, I think there's a big one on Oxford Street. There used to be. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Yeah. So, because there is in a former episode they talk about bins. And bins, I believe.
Oh, I've seen that. Yeah, you answered a question, didn't you?
Yeah. So I believe the bins. Yeah. Well, I think it might have been part of the House of Fraser group, but bins was definitely a Geordie thing. You know what I mean? It was like it was.
My mum used to get my school uniform from C&A.
Oh well, there you go. Look at that. And so he says it's the sort. He says she had one of them transparent negligees on, the sort you see in the window of C&A, and you can see right through it, all the contours of her body. and again, Barry's just in his own little world. Why is it when you take one off at night, you take 2 off at night, you can only find one in the morning? And he's got the rage. Barry's got the rage on, and Oz again, just he's like, and she was wanting me to do it, And there it was on a plate, but we kept getting thwarted. There was this SAS platoon kept swinging in through the windows, and my brother-in-law kept coming in doing juggling tricks. So Barry, now, speaking of the brother-in-law, has piqued Barry's interest, and Barry then thinks he's now in a position to analyse Oz's dream, and he said that could be very significant, Oz. And I was like, could it? He goes, yeah, the brother-in-law. He said, it represents guilt, you see, guilt and frustration. That's what most dreams are about, that and falling off tower blocks. You know, so but here's Barry trying to give his, you know, trying to give the impression that he's, you know, very knowledgeable on the subject, and like his knowledge fails very, very quickly. And but Oz agrees, said, "Oh, bloody frustrating, that's for sure. Whenever I did get to do it, and she was begging for it, you know." And I wonder why. It says it, and he goes, "I wonder why that seems to happen in your dreams." And Barry agrees, said, "Rather a sod, isn't it, Oz?" Says you can never attain what you really desire, and he says the same reason you can never find your bloody sock in the morning. And Oz continues to remember. He says, "Hey, she was beautiful. I bet she was called Yvette." Yvette? Why? He says, "Well, they're all called Yvette in them French films." So, you know, Oz is fallen in love with this woman of his dreams. I mean, bearing in mind it was only last week that he was, you know, engaged to a German girl, and so he's decided that this fictitious Yvette is the woman of our dreams. So anyway, Wayne enters, and he mentions, obviously they're running late. He says, "All right, Oz," says, "you're a bit behind, aren't you?" And then Oz tries to tell Wayne. He says, "Wayne, man, I've just had this fantastic dream." And Wayne, this is where it's about to all, you know, the premise of the episode is about to start.
Yeah.
And he says, "I've just seen a dream, mate. New typist in the admin. Must be Dagmar's assistant. Very tasty." And Oz is like, "Aye." And he says, "Very upmarket. Though I only caught a fleeting glimpse of her, mate." And then Oz, you know, in the process of getting ready, he goes to have his breakfast, which, as we find out, was a sandwich that he brought in from the bar last night. I mean, you can imagine how that probably fucking tastes. And he says, like someone's up, there's a bit of his sandwiches missing. And he says, who's been at that? And Wayne says, "Who's been at what?" And he says, "Man, me sandwich. I brought it over from the bar last night. I thought it would nice bacon, make a nice bit of breakfast." He says, "You cannot trust anybody these days." And so Barry leaves the hut. He says, "Right, ta-ra for a bit." Then his usual, the usual thing. And as he leaves, Oz finds Barry's sock under his sandwich. He's like, "Whose is this bloody sock?" So Bomber and Moxie enter the hut, and Bomber berates Oz a little bit for his tardiness. And he says, "Look at you, late as usual, sitting around with your thumb up your bum, mind in neutral." And Oz is, you know, tries to claim that it's a legitimate, thing for him to stay. He's not like he's just slept in or he's being lazy. You know, he decided to take the morning off. He says, "Look, I'm entitled to the occasional lying, you know." And then he says, and Moxie says, "Have you seen that new?" Now, does he say Judy or Julie? I don't know. I think they've obviously got a word for German women in the same way that they use Eric for German men. But I think it was either Judy, Julie, I don't know. I couldn't make it out. And I played it back a few times, but I think it was more Julie than Judy. I don't know. Anyway, if any of our listeners know exactly what they say, if they can post up in one of the in the Facebook group or send us an email. But anyway, so Moxie's seen the new girl in the admin hut, and he says, "Very delectable, I thought." And Wayne straight away says, "You keep your eyes off, son. I clocked it first." So Oz is now very interested. There's two people have seen this new girl, and Oz has decided that he's potentially going to investigate, you know, and he says, "Is she that smart?" And Moxie says, "Centerfold figure, Oz, you know." As we find out later. And centerfold figure, Oz, you know, and one of those let's fool around hairdos. That's the way he describes it. And Oz says, "Hey, she's not called Yvette, is she?" So straight away, Oz is trying to make the link between this young lady in his dreams and what is the new lady in the hut. So, basically, it cuts to the admin hut.
Yeah.
Here we see
the
new lady. Okay, so we see the introduction of Krista. So Krista is played by the very beautiful Lizette Anthony. Now, she's not that nice because I sent her 2 messages on Instagram asking her to come on the show and she didn't fucking reply. So she can fuck off. No, but I'm sure she's she's on Hollyoaks at the moment. Did you know that? Obviously, I don't know Hollyoaks. But
I knew she used to be on it. She's on it again, is she? I don't watch it, but
she's been in over 400 episodes of Hollyoaks. Now, I mean, they probably do fucking, 150 a year or something.
Yeah.
But she's been on there for many, 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 many years. So, that's, quite a big, it's quite a big show, isn't it? I mean, I don't fucking watch it, obviously, but, and she's obviously a main character being on for 400 episodes. So I'm sure she is probably a very, very busy lady. But if anyone knows Lizette Anthony, please tell her to check her DMs on Instagram. She's replied in there a couple of times and she didn't reply. But
she also has a Michael Elphick connection, doesn't she?
Well, look at here you go, George. I am super happy that you mentioned that. So, yes, she has 90 credits on IMDb, including Coronation Street, Casualty, Holby City, The Bill. She was in a lot of Depeche Mode videos.
Bryan Adams as well.
Bryan Adams videos. She was in Home to Roost, Lovejoy, and she was also in the film Krull, which Krull's one of them films that everyone watched in the 80s. For some reason, I never watched it. It come up on Amazon Prime a few weeks ago, and I thought, I've never watched that. I'll have a bit of a throwback. I put it on, tried watching it. Yeah, I turned it off after 10 minutes. It was fucking shit. But anyway, George, tell us about the connection to McGowan, Mr. Michael Elphick.
Yeah, she was in 3 Up, 2 Down.
That's correct. So yes, she was the wife in 3 Up, 2 Down. And was it her dad? Was Michael Elphick her dad? Or was it the other way? Yeah,
I'm not sure. I just knew she was in it. I didn't know too much.
Because it's the husband and wife live upstairs and the in-laws live downstairs. And Michael Elphick's like the Cockney, common father, and the mother-in-law from the other side thinks she's like a bit of a hyacinth bouquet, thinks she's a bit posh in that. So so I think Michael Elphick played her dad in 3 Up, 2 Down. So and don't forget, we see McGowan again next week.
Yeah.
We see the return of McGowan next week. So so Lizette Anthony. But George, also tell our viewers and listeners an interesting fact about young Lizette Anthony that you shared with me yesterday.
Yeah, in 1988, she done Playboy. Pictures are available on Google.
Yes. And just for pure research purposes, I myself went to Google yesterday and typed in Lizette Anthony Playboy and then simply clicked on images and was spoilt for choice. She's actually done quite a bit of nude.
I think because I read after the Playboy thing, the 3 or 4 films that she done after that, she stripped for every single film. So she must have thought, right, this is my way. I'm going to, capitalize.
Or all of these film directors and casting agents read the Playboy and went, right, we'll have that in the film. However, there was a noticeable difference between her and today's nude models in the fact that we did see a bit of an 80s push going on there.
Yeah, it was the style the kids were wearing those days. In those days.
I mean, it was, you would have, I mean, don't get me wrong. If she came and knocked on my door right now, I would definitely not hesitate at crawling through the undergrowth.
But
yes, there was a distinct there was a distinct Afro style, do contained in the underwear. But yes, bottom line is probably, I would go as far as to say, the most beautiful woman on the show. What do you reckon?
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
So, anyway, let us step away from our lust.
Oh, also, she was one of the accusers of Weinstein. Did you read that?
She?
Yeah, she said she was attacked in her own home.
Really?
Yeah, she's on the record saying that. Yeah.
Well, that I'm sure. I'm sure she's probably not lying. The guy was a fucking scumbag.
Yeah.
So, yes. Anyway, let's forget our lustful ways about young Lizette Anthony in her Playboy days and nude films, and we go back to the site office. So, we are in the site office, and Dagmar is giving her new assistant some work to do. And, she said, do this or whatever. And she's speaking in German. Anyway, so Dennis enters the site office, and he says hello to Dagmar. And she's, Dagmar sort of takes off her glasses and says hello. And she can see the smile on her face, and she's very pleased to see Dennis. And then she says, oh, Dennis, this is Krista. She's just come to work with us. And Dennis says, Guten Tag, Frau Krista. And Krista says, Guten Morgen. And she laughs. Obviously, she should be known as Fraulein Krista, as Dagmar corrects Dennis. And he says, oh, yeah, sorry. And then he goes a bit coy and quiet. He says, I was thinking about the weekend. And Dagmar just says, what about the weekend? And Dennis says, well, and he's obviously, indicating that he doesn't want to speak in front of young Krista. And Dagmar says, it's all right. I don't think she speaks English. And he says, oh, sure. He says, I didn't want to compromise you, did I? And Dagmar says, well, I think that's already happened after our first weekend. And as we know, it was somewhat of a disaster. And Dennis says, yeah, well, it's not common knowledge now, is it? And she says, oh, come on this site, I think by now it is history. And he says, well, there's no panic then, is there? I was just thinking that we might do something, might take off for the weekend. I've been putting in some overtime and I'm flush. And she says, oh, that sounds very good, but I have to see about my mother. And he says, well, I'll have a think about it. Sure. And he says, and he's just about leaving. She says, wait, the post, there's one here for you. And Dennis says, that's all right, I'll take them across. So Dennis offers to do the mail run. And she says, thank you. And he says, bye. And then he says, Wiedersehen. And Krista turns to Dagmar and smiles. And
she understands a bit more than she...
Yes. And she speaks in English. And she says, he is your friend. Obviously indicating to Dagmar that she knows what was going on. And Dagmar says, sprechen doch English. So basically means that you do speak English. And Krista just laughs and smiles and says, enough.
Yeah.
So they cut. So as they cut to the outside of the hut, and as Dennis leaves the hut, Moxie and Wayne, Moxie and Wayne are stalking and peering through the window of the admin hut. And Moxie says, oh, he says, that's poetry in motion. And as they see Dennis come out, they jump and knock over logs and da-da-da-da-da, and they basically, and Wayne sort of runs off and tries to hide, and he says, what are you two doing? And Wayne's like, oh, hello, Den. And he realizes he's been caught. He says, I'm just trying to catch a glimpse of our beloved. Our beloved. I mean, it's like, And Moxie says, oh, she looks very delectable, don't she? And Dennis just says, oh, you get no better, you lads, do you? So Dennis is walking through the site and Wayne chases him. And it was Wayne and Moxie chasing him. He says, what's her name then, Den? Come on, what's her name? And Moxie says, Oz said it was a vet or something. And Dennis says, did he? He says, well, that's her name then, a vet. So, now, at this point, do you think this is Dennis deliberately trying to stir the shit? Yeah, or trying to wind up? Because, you know, bearing in mind, like 2 minutes ago, he called her Frau Christa. She was introduced. This is Christa, and he said, "Hello, you know, hello, Frau Christa," and then he said, repeated, Fraulein Christa. So he knows that her name is Christa. Yeah. Now, do you think that he just can't be asked to enter the conversation, or do you think he wants some kind of deliberate wind up?
No, I think he just can't. He's probably just thinking about, you know, what he was talking to Dagmar about, and thinking about the weekend, and these two idiots, you know, will want, you know, he probably just can't be bothered with it, I think.
Well, because there's another point later on where he does something similar, and I'll point it out to you later. So I think that it's got to the point now where Dennis is sick of dealing with other people's issues.
Yeah.
So he might be trying, I think he might be trying to lay a few, you know, falsehoods in order to get people to get off his back. Because, you know, every time someone's got any kind of problem or issue, they come to Dennis. And, you know, if he keeps solving people's problems and keeps on giving them correct information, they're going to keep coming back. So if he gives them a bit of false information, they might piss off and leave him alone. But that is, again, just a speculation on my behalf. So they get to the... So they basically, they go, Dennis is sitting on the scaffold, it's lunchtime, and Neville turns up and he says, "Is there any mail for me, Den?" And Dennis is reading his letter and he says, "No, there's not, Neville." And he says, "Well, I didn't expect none. I got a parcel from Brenda yesterday. She sent us a new jumper and some of her sister's birthday cake. We'll have that later." So again, laying the ground rules for later. And Dennis is obviously distracted and he's his eyes smashing. And Neville notices, you know, Dennis is slightly out of sorts and he says, "It's not bad news, is it?" And Dennis says, "I don't know what to make of this, frankly." And he says, "How do you mean?" He says, "Well, it's from Vera. She says she wants to come out here." And he's like, "Yeah." And he says, "Aye." She says her sister's taking the Benz for the weekend and she could do with a break and it would give us a chance to talk things over. What's she mean by that? And Neville says, "You know, she probably wants to finalise things like." And he says, "Well, everything is finalised, man. The divorce has gone through. I don't know what it is. I don't know what there is to talk about. I mean, the solicitors did all the bloody talking. We didn't get a word in edgeways." And he says, "Well, it's, you know, like she says, it'll be a break for her." And Dennis says, "Well, if she wants a break, why doesn't that bloke take her somewhere? You know, he's the one with a posh new car and the new job." And then then Neville, like, I don't know where... Like, I don't know, just the most tactless, thoughtless, stupid foot in the mouth comment. And he says, "Aye." I says, "Aye, he's a very busy man though, Dennis. But he can't find the time." Like, and like this looks at me, it's like, what the fuck am I, corned beef? Like, you know, oh, like she can't get, like her fella can't get away, so she's going to take me, like the second prize. Like basically Neville's just gone, "Oh, aye, her boyfriend's a lot more important than you, Dennis." Yeah. I mean, absolutely insane.
And he's got a nice Capri.
That's it. Aye. So they cut back to the hut. And obviously Moxie has been telling Oz what Dennis has said. And Oz just go like, "Yvette." And Moxie says, "Yeah, that's it. That's her name." And Oz says, "If you're taking the piss out of me, Moxie, I'll knock your teeth out, mind." He says, "Yeah, I know you will, Oz." He says, "But I'm not. Dennis has seen her. She's called Yvette, straight up." And Barry plants that seed. He says, "That's the girl in your dreams, right?" And Oz says, "Aye." He says, "It's not a coincidence, this, you know. It's fate. It's and Barry said, "Kismet."
Kismet.
And Moxie, he says, "No, it's not. I've just told you. Her name's Yvette. Nothing Kismet, you nerk." And he says, "Oh, not so much of the nerk, thank you very much. Kismet's not a name, right, squid brain?" And he says, "Isn't it?" He says, "No, Kismet means fate, destiny. It's preordained phenomenon, the significance of which is incomprehensible to us mere mortals." And Mox says, "Everything that you say is incomprehensible." And he says it's also a very nice film starring Rita Hepworth. Well, I'm sure he probably means Hayworth, but I don't know. I didn't actually bother looking that up. But and Oz says, no, Barry's right, man. You know, I mean, I have this dream last night, but this gorgeous bird in it, and the next day, and he goes, it's frightening, man, scary. And again, Barry, dreams can be very interesting. You know, they do studies on them, and Moxie, like, you know, Barry's trying to impress people with his knowledge. And once again, Moxie's like, well, Moxie calls him on. He says, well, who do? And Barry says, well, you know, people that do studies on dreams, innit? You know, in universities and research laboratories, you know. They get these volunteer guinea pigs and they put them to sleep and then they study them, don't they? They study them, rapid eye movement. And then Oz says, who wants to know what a guinea pig dreams about when it's asleep? And Barry says, no, the term guinea pigs are a metaphorical term. They use real human beings or students, you know, subsidizing their meager grants. Dreams reveal the psyche. So Barry knows it all, and Barry's telling, you know, and he goes as far as to giving a backstory to the guinea pigs, the students who are doing it to subsidize their grants. And he says, dreams reveal the psyche. And Moxie's like, the what? And he goes, the psyche. And he says, what's that? And Barry obviously hasn't got an answer. He says, well, it's what dreams reveal, isn't it? And Oz says, I didn't know what he's bloody talking about me, but I know one thing. It's very mysterious. And Barry says, you could have known this girl in a past life. And Oz is like, could I? And he says, you could have known, it could have been centuries ago. She could be a reincarnation. And I was like, really? And Moxie says, have you still got a phone number? So we cut straight to the admin hut, and Oz walks into the admin hut looking for his young lady. And Dagmar says, hello, Oz. And he says, is a vet around? And she goes, vet? And he goes, no, I can see she's not. It's all right. And he's walking out, and she goes, Oz. And he says, it's all right. I've waited centuries. Another day won't make any difference. And like the look on Dagmar's face, she's like, what is this lunatic on about? So we cut to the bar, and Dennis is on the phone to his Vera.
Vera, yeah.
Yeah. And she answers the phone, Dennis, and obviously there's music playing in the background. It's a bit like he's in the bar. He says, hi, Vera. He says, look, I've reversed the charges because it's such a nightmare with all them stacks of change. And she says, are you all right? Now, you know, bearing in mind, we've already discussed this, that I'm not Vera's biggest fan. Now, not only am I not Vera's biggest fan because of, you know, the way she was a fucking absolutely fucking a total fucking bitch to Dennis in the first episodes before he left and all that, and then what she did with the kids and that when he came back from Germany for the weekend and all that. She's just not a very nice person. Now all of a sudden, you know, she's gone from being queen bitch, you know, to being like, you know, trying to be, and you're like, what's going on? And he says, how's the kids? And she says, yeah, they're fine. If I'd have known you were calling, I'd have kept them up. And he says, oh, well, don't keep them up, Lum. She says, I'm not now. I mean, it's difficult enough trying to get them off, I would assume that says. And he says, how are you then? She says, I'm all right. Did you get me letter? And he says, what's this about you coming out here? And she says, well, yes, well, I thought it might be useful, you know. I mean, I thought we could talk. And Dennis is like, well, there doesn't seem much to talk about. The solicitors, they filled in all the blanks. Yeah, and she says, yeah, I mean, that's the point, Dennis, you know. I think they took over. I mean, there was your lawyer and my lawyer and all these forms and statements to me. And he says, well, that's the way they work, isn't it? You know what I mean? She says, absolutely, that's the point. I think in the middle of that somewhere, you and I got lost. And he says, well, that's how they make their money, love. And obviously the music. And he says, that's how they make their money, love. And she says, I know, Dennis, will you listen? And he says, okay, I'm listening. What? She says, I'm saying I think that we got lost as people, as a couple. And I think if I came out, we'd be away from all that pressure, all that procedure. I mean, we're still a family, aren't we? And Dennis goes, are we? And I mean, you know, this, like I say, she was absolutely horrible to him, you know, horrible to him. And then all of a sudden, you know, she's like, oh, we're still a family, aren't we? And he's like, anyway, she says, Helen wants to take the kids up to the caravan and see houses. Now, bearing in mind, again, you know, the last time we saw Vera was when he was back for the weekend, and he wanted to see the kids, and the kids were going in the car with her boyfriend up to like see houses. And she goes, oh, they never get to go there. That's why I'm sending them. And yet, lo and behold, all of a sudden, a family member's got a caravan up there. You're like, hold on, you fucking bitch. So you stopped them from seeing these kids. Yeah, I mean, just, you know, reminds me that she's a scumbag and I don't like her. And she says, yeah, they can go to Bamborough Castle in the Farne Islands and they'll have a whale of a time. It'll do them good. And he says, I agree, that's good for them. And now you've sent us some extra. And he says, well, I've been putting in some overtime, you know, it's the least I can do. And she says, I really appreciate it, but I thought I could use that to fly out. So he's bust his hump, done her a massive favour, sent her an extra few quid, and she's going to spunk it on an aeroplane ticket. I sent extra money for his children. And he says, what? He says, do you think it's worth having you fly all this way here on your own? She says, oh, and then she goes, oh, Dennis Pet, please don't make it hard. Don't make it hard. You're the queen of making things hard. You absolute fucking bitch. You know what I mean? Like, just, I mean, the level of hypocrisy in this is just ridiculous. And he says, well, okay, all right, if that's what you want. So he puts the phone down and he goes back and he joins Bomber at the bar. Bomber's got him a drink. He says, I got you one. And he says, cheers, Bomb. He says, I reckon I could use one. Bomber says, everything all right, Bomb? And he's like, I mean, Dennis is rightfully confused. And he's like, oh, you tell me, Bomber, you tell me. So they cut back to the hut and it's dinner time in the hut. And it's Barry, Wayne, Neville and Moxie.
And what a menu.
Are eating their dinner. And Oz is lying on his bed. And Wayne says, who's for porting cigars then? And Moxie's like, you what? He says, well, it would be fitting, wouldn't it? A fitting compliment to tonight's classic cuisine. Anyway, Neville feels like he's being insulted. He says, look, I don't complain when you're on Cookhouse, Wayne. And Wayne says, I'm not complaining. You did your best, Nev, with the meagre resources at your disposal. And Barry says, take no notice. He's just bloody sarky. He's just as bloody sarky who was ever on Cookhouse. And Moxie says, yeah, he says, when you're on, mate, I don't see no visible improvement. And Wayne says, I'm not complaining. I think combining pickled herrings with sandwich spread and frozen Brussels shows a great deal of gastronomic flair. Obviously taking the piss. And Neville says, the sandwich spread was supposed to be tartar sauce. I just misread the label. Now, are you a fan of pickled herrings, young John?
Yeah, I mean, the times I went over to Amsterdam, I always grabbed some from the bar. The bar I was in, you'd sell them. So yeah, it was.
Yeah. Well, in Holland, they're called roll mops.
Right.
And I may have mentioned this. My granddad was from Holland.
Yeah.
So I remember as a child, this is, you know, I remember going to Holland as a child and being fed roll mops, and I'm quite a big fan of the old pickled fish. They do in Spain. They do a smaller version called boquerones, which are like the pickled anchovies.
Yeah. I think I had that over there. Yeah.
But yeah, so they do them for tapas in Spain. But yeah, so I'm a big fan of a roll mop herring, and that is obviously what Neville's been serving up. Anyway, so Oz is quite complimentary. He says it was a nice bit of bait. I thought, Neville, I enjoyed it, and Neville is, slightly flabbergasted by Oz's compliment. He says, but thank you, Oz. It is very tasty. And Wayne says, yeah, well, he says, it would be, wouldn't it? I mean, where you come from, that's he says, the equivalent of caviar's Branston bloody chutney, isn't it? And then this, starts a bit of a to-do. He says, well, I suppose where you come from, it's candlelit dinners and a mug of sherry, is it?
A mug of sherry.
He says, well, I am used to a more gracious living, I must admit. And he says, oh, you got an inside toilet now, have you? Anyway, Neville calms the situation. He says, don't start, you two. I've got a special surprise dessert for us all. And Wayne says, dessert? And Moxie says, what? Like a pudding? And Neville says, call it what you like. Have a look at this. And they're all like, what is it? What is it? And he says, it's something Brenda sent. Voila. And he reveals a chocolate cake, and they all go, oh, chocolate cake. And he says it was her sister's birthday and he thought would appreciate it. And Wayne says, well, she weren't wrong, was she? Anyway, Neville notices something. He says, hold on, someone's been at this already. And Barry says, what do you mean, Nev? He says, well, I only unwrapped it yesterday and I was keeping it as a surprise. And one of you's lot's been there. And they all deny knowledge, not me. And Barry screams, who's done that? And they all, they all chip in and claim, not me, not me, not me. Anyway, Neville points out, he says, look, there's a big chunk gone. He says, there was more than that yesterday. And then Oz makes the connection. He says, I bet it was the same gutsy bastard that ate my sandwich. And Moxie says, what sandwich is that? And he says, I brought a sandwich over from the bar to have on my breakfast, and the guts and a gutsy pig ate that. And Barry says, come on, Oz, who would want to eat half a salami sandwich? And he says, well, it was the same gutsy pig that ate the cake. He says, I tell you what. He says, whoever it was didn't take much. And Neville, principled Neville, says, aye. Yeah. But it's the principle. Mm-hmm. So Dennis and Bomber are obviously have left the pub and they're walking back to the hut. And they're obviously discussing the fact that, they're on the downward slope. They're nearly finished. They obviously discussed the fact, they've. So as we know, the reason they're in Germany as a non-German resident, they could work self-employed without paying any income tax in Germany. Yeah. And so we find that they've changed the law, and therefore there's going to be no more of this tax-free money available in Germany, and therefore they're either gonna have to go home or they're gonna have to sign up as get a German national insurance number and start tax and national insurance. So obviously majority of them, that's not an option. And so they're, Bomber says it's all goodbye. It's goodbye to all of this soon, Dennis, back to civilization. Dennis says, aye, in the dole queue, eh? Bomber says, can't win, can you? And then all of a sudden something attracts their attention. He says, my word, did you see that? And he says, I think I did, aye. And he says, was that what I thought it was? And he says, I think it was, Bomber. It came from the hut as well, as if we didn't have enough problems. So they enter the hut and everyone's eating the cake. And Wayne stands and he gives it. He says, the toast is Brenda. And they're all raising their drinks. And he says, aye, Brenda, definitely. He says, Brenda, definitely. And Brenda's sister. And he says, hey, Nev, rare treat that, mate. This Barry says, rare treat that, mate. Rare treat, Neville. And he says, and Oz says, aye, like getting a Red Cross food parcel in the war. And he says, it's been a great day, though, hasn't it? He says, a nice piece of crumpet in the admin and a great piece of cake in the hut. And Oz takes offence to what Moxie's just said. He says, hey, not so much of the crumpet, that Yvette special, I mean, Destiny sent her, didn't it? And Wayne says, Destiny did all the way here. And so Dennis and Bomber enter the hut. And they all say, hello, hello, Dennis. And Neville holds up a couple of bits of cake. And he says, I've saved you some cake. And Wayne says, get stuck in. He says, some cake Brenda sent. And Bomber's like, that'll do, Bomber. Real gent you are. And Neville says, there would have been more, but somebody got to it. And Dennis says, who? And he says, well, I didn't know who, but a big chunk got eaten. And as soon as they say that, Dennis and Bomber put 2 and 2 together. Yeah. They put it down. And Dennis says, well, in that case, I think I'll pass. And Bomber says, my 2. And they're all like, they're like baffled. They're, why? What for? And he says, it was a spiffing bit of cake, that is. And Oz says, I'll eat it. And him and Wayne grab the 2 pieces. And Dennis says, look, it's no offense to Brenda's cooking. I just think this hut's got another inmate. And I think he's be eating your cake, like. And Oz he says, well, how's that like? How's that? And Dennis says, we've just seen him, haven't we, Bomber? Bomber says he couldn't miss him. And Oz is like, who, man? He says, well, I don't know his name, but it was the biggest rat that I've ever seen. Look on everyone's faces. when they realise that there is a rat in the hut. And obviously, you know, they're all eating the cake that the rat's eating. They're all like, stuff like that. So obviously there's a bit of panic ensued, and Barry is the leader of the panic, and he's like washing all the cups and everything like that. And, you know, Oz is like, oh, how are you, man? Can you stop fannying on? And Barry says, I just think we should all have shots, that's all. And he's like, what are you talking about? Shots? He goes, shots, you know, injections, like some rats have got rabies, you know.
Rabies, yeah.
And Wayne says, well, that would only affect us if we got bit, wouldn't it? Barry says, not necessarily. And Wayne says, of course it would. He said, could be in our bloodstreams. We ate the cake after the rat did, so it could be in our bloodstreams, couldn't it? And Moxie's like, could what? And Barry says, deadly poison, coursing through our veins right now. And Moxie's like, deadly poison. And Barry's like, rabies, Moxie, could make us all go berserk. And Wayne says, well, some of us already are. So, ain't we? So Oz is probably immune.
Yeah.
And Oz says, get stuffed. And Wayne says, hold on, though. The rat did eat Oz's sandwich after he did, right? He said, so the old rat can't be feeling too chipper either. And Oz is like, I warned you, son. And Barry says, you never take anything seriously, do you? Says, this is how the plague started. And Moxie's like, what plague? He says, what plague? He says, the Great Plague. Wiped out half of Europe, the Black Death.
Basil the rat.
Yeah. And he says, you mean to tell us the Black Death could start up again because a rat ate a piece of Brenda's chocolate cake? Leave me out. Barry says, I'm not bothering with you anymore. Go on, just die, right? And don't say I didn't warn you. And like Wayne fakes a death. He's like, like, you know. And Oz says, hey, he says, the rat never ate much of Brenda's cake, did it? It mustn't have liked it very much. Anyway, so Nev now feels the need to defend his wife. He said, Brenda didn't make the cake, it was her sister's. And Moxie says, it's all student academic, this. What about rabies and injections and that? So Moxie's bought into Barry's hysteria. And Barry's like, right, Moxie. And Wayne just, you know, Wayne, the voice of reason, he says, for God's sake, all of us as well, none of us have suffered any horrendous after effects, and we all ate the bleeding cake last night. You're overreacting, aren't you? Come on, aren't you? And Neville says, Wayne's right, we are. So Moxie says, I suppose so, but I must admit, I don't feel, Moxie, I must admit, I don't feel any worse than I usually do. Moxie, the sick note. And Barry's like, I'm just talking about taking precautions, that's all. And I says, it's all a lot of bollocks, man. Big fuss about nout. Wayne says, right, who wants some toast? And I says, I'll have a slice. And Moxie says, could have been at the bread, you know, the rat. And obviously everyone's like as soon as he says that, the looks are like, oh, maybe I won't. So Nev cuts now. Nev's walking to the toilet hut and Dennis is in there shaving. So Dennis says, what's the verdict then? And Neville says, it's all agreed. It's now to worry about. And he says, of course it's not, man. He says, how big was the rat? And he says, well, what does that matter? He says, Bomber said you couldn't miss it. He says, he was just winding you up, man. Probably a mouse. He says, how come you can see it in the dark then? He says, leave it alone, man, will you? Now, this is the point I was talking about earlier. So, once again, Dennis now says something which I constitute as being a wind-up. So they're all worried about this rat. And he says, leave it alone, will you? And then he pauses and he says, I thought it was a cat myself. And so he's like, you know, for the second time, Dennis is sticking his spoon in and giving it a bit of a stir. And Neville's like, yeah, it's that big. He says, look, Neville. And then again, you know, he says, look, Neville, how is it every time I've got a problem, I end up sorting out your problems or the others, you know, all of whose problems are a lot more trivial than me own. So, you know, he's stirred the pot and then he's pointed out, you know, he's said something, you know, to wind Neville up. And then he said, look, you know, why don't you just piss off and leave me alone? And Neville says, I'm sorry you didn't realize. Said, you never do, none of you. And Neville says, Vera's still coming over. He says, she's coming to the weekend. And he says, Neville says, I cannot see it's worth it myself. I mean, we'll all be packing up in a couple of weeks. Then we'll all be back home, thank God. And Dennis, you know, hints, he says, well, maybe some of us won't. And he says, how do you mean they're changing the law? You've got no choice. He says, well, we have got a choice of signing up as an official tax-paying German worker. Neville says, oh, aye, who wants to do that? And he says, look, Neville, not everyone is as desperate to go home as you are. And he goes, what, you might stay? And he goes, aye. He says, that's a possibility, aye. So, you know, this is the first time, obviously, like I say, they've mentioned about the changing of the law.
Yeah.
You know, Neville is desperate to get home to his wife. But, you know, Dennis has got options. And one of those options is the lovely Dagmar. But we cut back to Newcastle. And so Brenda has paid Vera a visit before Vera heads over to Germany. And so obviously she's brought some stuff around for her to take for Neville. And she says, oh, I'm giving these snaps. And he says, party. And Vera gives her a cup of coffee or a tea. She says, right there, I haven't sugared it. She says, right, Tom. She says, will you leave Friday? She goes, no, Saturday. Change planes in Frankfurt and get there in the afternoon. Brenda says, I'm scared of flying, aren't you? And she says, I'm more scared of seeing Dennis. And she says, how do you mean? She goes, well, I don't know. Just going over there, I suppose. I don't know what it will be like. I don't know if he wants me to go. And then Brenda's like, but he asked you, surely. And Vera says, no, it was my idea. And Brenda says, it was your idea. So again, you know, Brenda's obviously getting, you know, the Dennis's side of the argument via on the weekly phone calls. And so she knows that Vera's the one that's instigated this divorce. And then all of a sudden Vera's the one. And so even Brenda's like, it was your idea. Like thinking you're absolutely mental, love, you know? And she says, you know, when the divorce proceedings were going on, Dennis being away made it a lot easier, but in the same respect, that distance hurt us. We just became references on a solicitor's letter. You know, I've only seen him once since we went away to Germany, and that wasn't very pleasant. Aye, thanks to you, you fucking bitch. You know what I mean? You know, it wasn't very pleasant. Aye, thanks to you sending his children off with your boyfriend when he come all the way back from Germany. I mean, like, you know, yes, it wasn't very pleasant because you are an absolute shithouse of the highest order. So Brenda says, well, these things never are, Vera. And he says, I know we should still be friends, whatever happens. Who'd want to be friends with you, you fucking twat? You know what I mean? And she says, what do you mean, whatever happens? And she goes, well, I mean, for the sake of the kids, we still share the kids, don't we? And then, so Brenda's confused and Brenda just sticks it on her. She says, why are you going out there, Vera? Like, sticks it straight on her. Like, you know, and then we cut. We don't find out the answer. So we cut back to Germany on the site, and the Turks are playing football. And Oz leaves the admin hut with a big smile on his face, and Moxie sees him, and Moxie has a look of terror because Moxie knows that he fucked up by telling them the wrong name. And so he sees Dennis, and he goes on, he says, it's not a vet, is it? And Dennis says, what isn't? And he says, that new Judy, again, Judy, in the admin, her name's not a vet. And Dennis says, so what? Who said it was? And he goes, you did. And he says, did I? He says, it's as good a name as anything, isn't it? And he says, no, it's not. Her name's Krista, and Oz will bloody murder me.
Krista.
Again, you know, so Dennis, you know, fed Moxie some false information, which is, you know, got Moxie into Oz's bad books. So do you think that Moxie is ever going to come to Dennis and ask for information again? I think that this was a tactical ploy by Dennis in order to prevent the other members of the hut leaning on him. And Dennis says, for God's sake, Moxie, what's in a name? And Moxie says, a fist in my face, that's what. He's only gone and bought her flowers, hasn't he? And he says, can you not just sort out your own problems? Just leave me to sort mine out. And Moxie says, you got us into this, you know. And so Dagmar and Krista, maybe he's coming back from lunch or arriving, and they arrive in Dagmar's car, the Volkswagen Beetle. And Wayne is having a bit of a watch and a stalk. And Krista smiles, and you can see that Wayne, just by a good bit of acting by Gary Holton here, because he doesn't even say a word, just the way that he looks forlorn and smitten, doesn't he?
Smitten.
And this is pretty cool. So Dennis is walking past, and Wayne just says to Dennis, he goes, "She's adorable, isn't she?" And Dennis goes, "Nah, she's Krista." So he's now on a bit of a wind up there. So they enter Dagmar and Krista enter the office, and they see the flowers that Oz has left. And Krista in Germany says, "Oh, flowers or whatever. I wonder who they're for." And Dagmar says, "They're a card." And she says, "Yeah, it's in English." And Dagmar reads, it says, and it says, "To a vet, someone who has waited a long time." And Krista says, "Vats? What?"
Vats.
And Dagmar translates, for a vet, da 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 da. And Krista says, "Where's this a vet?" So, Oz confronts Moxie. So Oz goes steaming through the and Barry realizes what's happening and chases. Like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And Moxie's screaming, and obviously the Moxie's plastering a wall inside. And Oz is in no mood, and he goes, "No, Oz, no, it wasn't my fault." And Barry's like, "Don't hurt him, Oz, don't hurt him." And Oz has picked Moxie up off the wall and basically rubbed him in all of this fresh plaster. And he says, "You won't take it out serious, will you? You're always pulling some stunt." And he goes, "It was Dennis, honest." And he goes, Dennis? He goes, "Dennis is too straight to play funny buggers." And Barry's like, Oz, it was a genuine mistake. It was a genuine mistake, really. And Oz flings plaster at Moxie's head, and he says, "Look."
He's carried on the floor, isn't he, Moxie?
He's like, "Look, Moxie's not malicious, is he? He's naive, right, but not malicious." And he goes, and Moxie's getting up, and he goes, "Yeah, right." And he says, "See, it was just a genuine mistake, that's all, genuine mistake." And Oz, and he says, "Well, so much for your," says to Barry, he says, "Well, so much for your bloody kismet," or whatever you call it. And Barry says, "It's not my fault you weren't called a vet, is it?" And he says, "I feel like a right Burke now, though." And I mean, you got to think about it, right? So even in his dream, there was no name mentioned. And he was walking up gone, "Oh, I think she was probably called a vet." Like, he just made that shit up. And then they've gone, "Oh, aye, she was a vet." And he's like, so, he's gone and done all of this stuff on the fact that something that he might have dreamt about. I mean, it's, it's clearly his own fault. But anyway, so he says, "I feel a right Burke now." And Moxie says, "Hey, Oz," he says, what? He says, "A vet, Krista, Kismet, whatever a bloody name is. I mean, what's the difference? What's in a name?" And Barry says, "Aye, I mean, she might not be preordained from another life, Oz, but she ain't half got lovely bosoms." So Barry, even Barry has noticed that she's got a cracking set of knockers on her.
And we've seen them also, haven't we? So, yeah.
Well, exactly. And again, if you would like to see those bosoms, please go to Google and type in Lizette Anthony Playboy and click images. And anyway, so Dennis enters the admin hut, and he's obviously got some bad news for Dagmar. And Dagmar says hello, and she says, "Why have you got such a serious face?" He says, "I'm all right." He says, "Well, I'm not really. It's about the weekend." And she says, "That's all right. I found someone to look after my mother." And she goes, "Ah." And she looks up, and obviously Dennis has got and she goes, "Oh, there's not going to be a weekend, is there?" And he says, "No." He says, "Well, I mean, there will be. I want that very much. It's just this weekend, Vera, you see my wife, she's coming out on Saturday." And she goes, "I see." And he goes, "No, you don't." And, this is where Dennis now, is basically, professing his undying love for Dagmar. And he says, "No, you don't. Look, this wasn't my idea. It was hers. There's a few problems to sort out, formalities. I'm sorry." And she says, it's all right, perhaps another time. He said, "Well, there's no perhaps about it." And she goes, "You're telling me?" He goes, "I am telling you. Next week for sure, or the week after." And she says, "That is when you're going back to England." And Dennis says, "Not necessarily." "Oh." And Dagmar says, that's really your business. He says, don't act like this. He goes, well, you're not. And she goes, I'm not acting like anything. He goes, yes, you are. You're acting like you're offended. Look, I told you it wasn't my idea. It was hers. I don't know what the problem is, but I owe it to her to find out. And she says, of course, you must see her. And he says, well, I want you to as well. And Dagmar goes, me? You want me to meet her? And she goes, yes. And she goes, why? And he says, well, you know she exists, and I want her to know that you do. And Dagmar says, do you think that's such a good idea? Well, as we later find out, maybe Dagmar was right. And he says, look, Dagmar, I'm sick of keeping part of my life, right? And an important part. I'm sick of keeping it like a secret, trying to hide it. I mean, with the lads, there was good reason, but I see no reason to hide it from Vera or anybody else for that matter, including your mother. So obviously Dagmar's obviously been keeping it a secret as well. So Dagmar says, even her, and he says, look, I mean it, Dagmar. And Dagmar smiles. You know, Dagmar's obviously, very, very taken with Dennis. And Dennis is saying that, he wants to make it in, their relationship.
Yeah.
Forward. And she says, all right, I will meet your Vera. And he says, thanks, I better get back to work anyway. And he says, I see you have some other secret admirers, eh? And she says, oh, yes, many. I get flowers like that nearly every day. And Dennis starts to read the card to Yvette, and Oz flies into the admin hut, grabs the flowers, and steams out. And he says, I'll have them, thank you. So Oz is absolutely upset. And he's steaming through the building site with his bunch of flowers, and Wayne sees an opportunity.
Yeah.
And he says, all right, Oz, who bought you them then? And Oz is in no mood. He's like, get stuffed. He goes, oh, charming. No, seriously, though, what are they for? He says, no, man, money down the drain, man. And he says, you bought them for someone? He says, none of your business why I bought them. He says, yeah, all right. He says, I'm not trying to needle you. And he says, no, you better not neither, right? I've had a belly full today. And he says, what are you going to do with them? He goes, I sling them, I suppose. He goes, I'll take them off you. He goes, how much? He goes, how much do you pay for them? 15 quid.
I mean, that's a hell of a lot for flowers in those days.
It is a big bunch of flowers. You go and try and buy a bunch of flowers like that. You're probably talking 60 to 100 quid these days. I'm telling you, they are not cheap. Look at the look on your face there, George. You obviously haven't bought any flowers.
No. I've done an interflora for my mum's birthday last month, and that was, I think that was 35 quid, and it was, and it came with a glass bowl as well. So
really,
it wasn't that much.
I might have had a touch there, but So anyway, I mean, if you're going back, so that would probably be the equivalent of about 60 quid these days.
Yeah.
So that's probably about, I would say that's probably about right. But I mean, bearing in mind, that's also, nearly half a day's work. They're getting paid £40 a day or whatever. Anyway, but you are right, it is a lot of money. And Wayne says, I'll give you half. And he says, half? He says, they're only 2 hours old, man. He says, yeah, but they're still secondhand. And I mean, there's not much demand for secondhand flowers, is there? And he says, they're as good as new. Look, he says, they're wilting. He says, oh, yeah, you should have put them in water, son, otherwise they wilt. Look at them petals, definitely wilting. Like Wayne's a flower expert all of a sudden. He says, they're well past their prime sunbeam. And he says, I think £5 a bit. He says, I think a £5 is a bit over generous, really. And Oz says, it was $7.50 at the bricks. He says, with wilting by the second, ain't they? I mean, the price goes down, son, even as we speak. So they're on the site. Dennis, Neville and Bomber, and they're all laying bricks. And they're talking, and Bomber says, your old woman's still making the trip, is she, Den? He says, I shall be over tomorrow afternoon, Bomber. And he says, putting her in a hotel, are you? And he says, I can hardly put her up in the hut, can I? And Bomber says, I think sometimes our wives should stay in the hut. They should all come over on a charter, be an eye-opener for them, see where we really live. And Dennis says, aye. And he says, make them realise what a sacrifice we make. And Dennis says, especially if they saw King Rat, eh? And Bomber says, aye. And Neville said, I had a letter from Brenda this morning. And he says, oh, I'd have been surprised if you hadn't. He said, she's been round to see your Vera. Says she couldn't really work out why Vera was so keen on coming over. Then I says, well, I'll know tomorrow, won't I? And he says, and it could be a bit tricky. He says, tricky, how come? He says, well, you know. He says, you know. And he says, now what? And he says, well, I'm a man of the world, Dennis. You and Dagmar could be, well, it could be tricky. Dennis says, not necessarily, you know. Vera will meet Dagmar when she comes out here. Dennis says, she will. Shocked. And he says, why not? He said, it's not as though I'm cheating. He says, Dagmar's not my bit on the side. Vera, she's got Alan, hasn't she? And he says, yeah, but he says, there's no buts about it, Bonnie lad. That's the way things are. And the sooner everyone realises that's the way things are, the better. And Neville goes, well, fine, you know, I couldn't agree more. So, Wayne, now.
In charge of the flowers.
But Wayne now has got the flowers off us, and he enters the admin hut, and he presents the flowers to Krista, and he says, "I'd like you to have these." And Dagmar is on the phone, and she's chatting away on the phone to a client or whatever, and Krista says, "For me," and he says, "And is not for Yvette, yeah?" Again, no, they're for you from me. And Dagmar's like, look, Wayne, what's going on? Who do these flowers belong to? And Wayne, with the cheesiest line you've ever heard, he says, to her, as does my heart. And yes, so Wayne is very, very much in love with young Krista. So Wayne is again stalking the admin, and he's hanging around. And so it's obviously the end of the day. Normally they'd all be going for a drink. And he says, all right, Wayne, are you coming to the club for a bevy or what? And Wayne just says, yeah, in a minute, lads. And Barry says, what are you doing hanging around here? And he says, nothing. He says, I thought you were loitering with intent, And he says, Wayne says, I was waiting for the sunset.
Sunset, yeah.
I mean, that's the worst excuse I've ever heard. I mean, and bearing in mind, seeing as it's still bright, sunset's probably fucking 3 to 4 hours away. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And Moxie says sunset, and Wayne says, yeah, I'll see you later, lads. All right. And Barry says, suit yourself. And he goes, what's he on about? Sunset. And Barry says, it's one of the most beautiful things in the world, isn't it? Dusseldorf sunset. And Wayne walks off, and Barry continues. He says, have you never noticed the exotic glow the sun makes in its dying moment over the asbestos warehouse? Ranks with the Andes, that does, or even Malibu. And Moxie says, what's he doing? And Barry just says, I don't know. So, again, so we see the angle from inside the hut, and they're looking out of the window, and Wayne is hanging around. And so obviously Dagmar sees him and says, I think there's, she's speaking in German. She says, I think he's waiting for you. And she picks up the flowers, and she says something in German, and then she goes, men. Men. And she says, and so Dagmar says, in German, she says, you could say thank you for the flowers. And they leave the office, and Dagmar locks up and says, goodbye. And she says, I'll see you tomorrow. Have a nice day. So Krista walks to her car, and Wayne, stalker Wayne, approaches. And he says, oh, hello, I was just passing. Like,
yeah,
I've not seen you hanging around, you fucking weirdo. And she goes, why did you buy for me these? And he goes, why did I buy for you? I just felt that, impulse. Now, obviously, that was the thing. Do you remember the advert?
Yeah.
Acting on
perfume,
it. It was for the body spray or whatever it was.
Yeah.
The man would smell it and then run and buy the woman some flowers. And he says, yeah, it was on impulse. And she goes, thank you so much. And obviously, so she's trying to, put him off, and she walks away, and Wayne stalks her and follows her. And she goes, they are very lovely. And Wayne says, it's no more than you deserve. And then she says, there were other flowers much like these from Oz, I think his name. And Wayne sort of brushes it up. He says, really? What a coincidence. She says, look, my name's Wayne. And she says, I know. So Wayne opens her car door and she puts the flowers in and she says, "Thank you very much." And he says, "My pleasure, love." And then she sort of, she's been pushed, like sort of trying to get rid of him. And then she sort of comes round a little bit and she says, She says, "You English, you live here, yeah?" And he says, "Yeah, in the hut, we call it the Stalag." And she's like, "What?" And he says, "Because it's like a prisoner of war camp." And she go, "Oh, it's a nice camp, yeah." And he goes, "Nice, not exactly the Hilton, love, but it's okay, just one of the hardships we have to endure to stay in your wonderful country." And she says, "Show me." And he goes, "You what?" And she goes, "Yeah." She closed the door.
He's a bit taken by surprise there, isn't he?
Yeah, very much. And she goes, "Show me." And she shuts the car door and she takes off towards the hut. So Wayne's like, "Look, it's a bit basic, love. I mean, it's got old socks and crisps and things in it. And, I really don't think you'd like it that much." And so the music starts playing. It's like sort of, the background, like it's, I don't know, you can't describe it. It's not prisoner of war music again, but it's sort of quite similar.
Yeah.
The music sort of building up the tension. Now, obviously, Oz and Dennis and Moxie see what's going on. And Barry's like, "Here, Oz, is that Wayne with your bird?" And he says, "She's not my bird, not since I found out she isn't who she wasn't." "She's still very tasty though, isn't she?" And he says, yeah, when Wayne gets his evil hands on her, mate." And Oz says, "Eh?" And then he realizes, and so they start following. And they see Wayne and Krista enter the hut. And he says, "What's he up to?" And Wayne. And he said, and as they enter the hut, she obviously looks around and sees it's pretty, disgusting and basic. He says, "Well, I did warn you, love." And she says, "It's like army." And he says, "Oh, like prison." So they cut back to the outside, and Oz and Barry and Moxie are approaching the hut, and they hear the screams.
Yeah.
Obviously, automatically, they assume that Wayne is the protagonist of these screams, and Wayne's been doing things he shouldn't with the young Krista. And so they hear the scream. Oz kicks the hut door open, and Krista's standing on Wayne's bed, screaming hysterically, "No, no, no." And Wayne's also standing. He goes, "Don't worry, love, don't worry." He says, "And get up, stand up." And Oz enters, and Oz just looks and makes the assumption, and he goes, "You dirty bastard."
Dirty bastard.
Wayne straight away realizes that he is in trouble. And he says, "No, look, you don't understand, you don't understand." And Oz just grabs him by the scruff of the neck and launches Wayne head into the muddy puddle inside. And he goes back inside, and Krista's shouting, he goes, he bite me. And Oz thinks, and Oz is like, what, Wayne was biting her? And he says, "Look, calm down, pet. I've taken care of that dirty little turd." And Barry comes in with Moxie. He says, "What's the matter, miss? Did Wayne try to ravish you, miss?" And she says, "No, there is a rat." And obviously, as soon as she mentions the rat, Barry and Moxie sort of, you can see the shiver go down their spine. And so they get back. They cut back to the hut later on. Obviously, Moxie's back from the shower, and Dennis is getting ready to go. And this is obviously the next day, and Dennis is getting ready to go.
Got his suit on.
Yeah, want to meet Vera in here. And Mox says, "All right, Den. All right, Mox says, I thought you'd have gone for the day." And he says, "No, I just want to get me dry cleaning." And he says, "Everyone's up like the sudden lark this morning. Bomber and Oz have gone to the baths already." And Dennis says, "I saw Barry and Neville across the shops getting rat traps." He says, "Not before time. Did you hear it last night?" And he says, "No, I don't think so." He says, "Our son did, scratching round as if it owned the place." And Dennis says, "Well, it obviously doesn't give a rat's, eh?" And as usual, quick-brained Moxie takes a while, and he goes, and Moxie says, "Oh," and then there's a long pause, and then the penny drops, and he says, "Don't give a rat's. Good joke, that pun like." And Dennis says it wasn't bad for this time in the morning. And he says, just the thought of it, though, it's disgusting. He says, I hope you get rid of it by the time I get back tomorrow. And he says, you're not here tonight. And he says, no, my wife's coming over. I'll stop in the same hotels. And Moxie's a bit nosy. He says, the same hotel, but not the same room, though. And then says, no, not anymore. No, ta-ra, mate, ta-ra, mate. So we see them at Dusseldorf Airport. And Vera arrives, and you know, there's sort of they're walking through sort of arm in arm, and you know, making small talk. You know, the band's okay, smashing. I spoke to them before I left, having a great time, going to Holy Island today. Back to school on Monday, and she says, well, Helen's going to bring them back and stop over, so she will get them off if I don't go back. And Dennis says, what do you mean if you don't go back? And she says, well, I thought I might stay Sunday night as well. I mean, it's not often I get to go abroad. And then there's a pause, and she says, unless it's inconvenient. And Dennis says, no, whatever you like. And she says, well, you don't seem very keen. And it's like, you don't seem very keen. Aye, because you're a fucking bitch. And the last time I saw you, you were the queen of all bitches, and nobody fucking likes you. And yet, you were expected to get off this aeroplane and him to be down on his hands and knees welcoming you. You know what I mean? You don't seem very keen. Aye, thanks to you, you fucking bitch. So, and Dennis just says, well, you've never seen Dusseldorf on a Sunday night, have you? And she says, will we pass by where you were? And he goes, what for? There's nothing for you to see there. And she goes, well, I just thought it'd be nice to see where you live, that's all. And he says, well, Wayne showed a young lass round where we live yesterday, and she's in intensive care still. Poor lass saw a rat. And Vera says, a rat? How revolting. Like with that posh voice on again. Shut up, man. We know where you're from. And she goes, I never knew conditions were that bad. And he says, well, they're not really. The rat just showed up this week, captivated by some of Brenda's chocolate cake. Mm-hmm. She says, oh, she sent some things for Neville. Will I see him? And she says, aye, if you like. The thing is, I thought we might invite Neville to eat with us tonight. And she goes, well, I'd rather it was just ourselves. And he says, well, I've invited somebody else, like. She's like, who? And Dennis says, well, just a friend, you know, someone I thought you should meet. And, you know, Vera is, you know, visibly taken aback and upset. And so they cut back to the hut. Wayne's getting ready to go out. He's drying his hair. And Moxie's questioning, he says, so he goes, you're not seeing her, are you? And he goes, I am. And he says, after last night's fiasco. And he says, did well to get out of that one. Must have stretched your powers of persuasion to the limit. And Wayne says, no, he says, I didn't see anything, Mox. He said, she felt sorry for me, I suppose. I mean, I did look a right pillock, didn't I? And when I walked her to her car, well, when I squelched her to her car, and she was ever so sympathetic. And Moxie says, moved, I suppose, by the squalor of your surroundings. And he says, no, I'm more aware of my embarrassment. And then she did something, and it was incredible. And again, this is, you know, Wayne showing how very much he's taken aback by this young lady. Moxie says, what? She goes, she took out this hanky, this little white soft hanky out of her bag, wet the corner of it, and rubbed some mud ever so gently off the end of me nose. And he goes, I tell you what, Mox, I had goose pimples all over. And then Moxie is like, the same way that he was being questioning Dennis about staying in the same room with his wife, he's like, wet it with her tongue, did she?
Yeah.
He goes, the hanky, wet it with her tongue, like. And I mean, it's a fairly creepy thing to say. And Wayne says, well, of course. What do you think she does? Carry a hose pipe round with her? And anyway, Neville and Barry enter, and they have been to the shop. And Neville says, look what we have been bought. And he shows, obviously, the rat traps that they bought. And Moxie says, look at the size of that. You could trap a bear with that. And Neville says, aye, wait, Dennis said it's a big one, and I'll get some bait for them. And Barry says, it could be more tonight. You know, notorious breeders are rats. And Wayne says, leave it out. They can't have raised a family in 2 nights, not on top of Brenda's chocolate cake. And Neville announced, he says, we bought this and all. Poison. And Moxie says, how long after it eats that does it die? And Barry says, it doesn't matter, does it, as long as it does die? And Moxie says, well, it does matter if we find dead rats all over the place. And Neville says, no, they're not going to die here. You see, that poison, what that poison does, makes them thirsty, gives them a raging thirst.
Which is very true. Yeah.
Wayne jokes, he says, like us lot after a curry. Neville says, well, sort of anyway. He says, well, they're desperate for a drink, so they go looking for it. And then Moxie again makes a joke. He says, they'll head straight for Oz's locker then. Neville says, no, they're not going to die here. He says, however, let's get the trap set. He says, your rat knows instinctively that water's at the bottom of hills, so he'll head off down to the river and find it. And Wayne says, oi, oi, where are you going to put that? I don't want to come in later tonight and lose a foot, son. And he says, I'll put it down by the skirting board away from the beds. And Wayne says, all right, look, lads, I'm away. I'd like to give you a hand, but I've got to go into town. I'll see you later. And Wayne has got his best suit on. He's combed his hair. He is attempting to make the best impression possible. So, as after he's left, Moxie makes a point and he's gossiping. He says he's seeing her, you know, that Krista, he's serious. And Barry sort of laughs. He goes, serious, Wayne? And Moxie goes, well, yeah. And they all look at each other. So they cut to the hotel, and Dagmar waits at a table in the reception bar area of this hotel, and Dennis comes down the stairs. And again, you know, they're all dressed up. And he says, hiya, and she says, hello, and he says, you're prompt. And she goes, well, I am German. And he goes, so you are, so you are. He says, do you want a refill? No. And then he calls the waiter over. He says, bitter. He says, 5 gin and tonic, 2 gin and tonics. So he says, and she says, how is your Vera?
Funny, she always says your Vera, doesn't she? When she's referring to her, yeah.
Maybe that's how the Germans would say it in German. I don't know. Maybe it's a lost in translation moment, but she, you know, or she's making a point, you know, that, you know, even though, you know, she knows that even though him and her are together, you know, he still has Vera as well. And fine, she'll be down in a second. And she says, have you sorted out your problems? You know, straight to the point. She wants to know where she stands. And he says, well, there weren't any problems really, just the usual things, money, the kids, you know. Then I showed her around the town. And she says, when you go back to England, he says, if I go back to England, she goes, if you go back to England, where will you live? And he says, oh, I'd never really thought about it. Probably have to stay at my mum's at first. You know, that'll be something. You know, I have to remember to wipe my feet when I come in and don't rumple the cushions and empty the ashtrays. Because she sounds like my mother. And the drinks arrive and he says, Dankeschön. And then he takes a drink. Cheers.
Oh, he knocks that back, I think, doesn't he?
This is, and so she says, are you nervous now about this? And he says, yeah, I am all of a sudden. And she goes, it will be all right. And so she puts her hand on his shoulder to reassure him. And then the camera angle changes and it's Vera at the top of the stairs. And she sees Dagmar and Dennis, obviously, and realizes that they are a couple. And the wrecking ball has just come crashing into Vera's. Vera was thinking she was going to go back. She was going to go to Germany. She was going to, tell Dennis that she's, she still wanted to be with him, and Dennis was going to fall at her feet. And she's turned up. And the thing about it is Dagmar is a very good-looking woman as well.
Yeah, she looks good on that scene. Yeah.
So it's, not only has Dennis got himself a woman, but he's got himself a very, very nice woman into the bargain.
Yeah.
Anyway, Dennis sees her at the top of the stairs and he calls her over here, pet. And he introduced her. He said, Vera, this is Dagmar. And Dagmar's very well spoken and says, how do you do? It is very nice to meet you. But do you notice that she doesn't stand up? Yeah?
No. Yeah.
Dagmar's sitting down. And, I don't know if maybe it's just English or whether it's different. I don't know, but protocol would say, you know, someone comes to the thing and that person stood up and they're going to introduce you. You would then stand up to shake hands. Yeah.
Yeah.
Stays sitting in her seat, and Vera reaches over and she.
This is my turf.
Like Dagmar, because women are bitchy, man. Let's have it right. You know, women can be proper horrible to each other. And so Dagmar's basically saying, "This is my manor, bitch. You're coming onto my turf." Yeah. And she says, "It's nice to meet you." And Vera says, "It's nice to meet you too as well." And Dennis says, "I got you one in. There you are. Thanks." And they all cheers. And Vera, and when they say cheers, Vera cuts Dagmar the fucking filthiest look you can possibly imagine. Like, if looks could kill, Dagmar would be in her grave. And Dagmar does the right thing, and she just sits there and you know, is very dignified with her response. And you know, the conversation continues. And Dagmar says, "Dennis told me he showed you the town." And Vera says, "Yes, it's a lot nicer than I expected." And Dennis interjects and he says, "I didn't show her where we work, of course." And Dagmar says, "Yes, that is not so nice." And then Dennis, I think, you know, Dennis makes a bit of a boo-boo here. And he says, you know, one of the lads I work with, he says we should bring all of the wives over here and make them see what a miserable existence that we lead.
And you know what line's coming next.
Well, Vera's like, "Well, you don't seem to lead too bad a life." And I mean, it's like she's being fucking, you know, she was trying to be all nice and she's reverted back to her factory of being a fucking bitch. Yeah. And no wonder Dennis was happy to get rid of you. You know what I mean? And Dennis says, "Oh, well," he says, and he's like, Dennis is like, "Look, I need another drink." He says, "Let's just have another one, shall we? And then we'll go and eat." And it's like, it's, you know, that thing, it was at this moment, he realized that he'd fucked up. So, you know, it was, you know, when Vera's cut back with that bitchy line, "You don't seem to be leading too bad a life." Dennis is like, "Oh, I need another drink." And he's like, "This is a bad idea." Well, going back to where Dagmar said, she goes, "Do you think that's a good idea?" Right now, that was the moment that Dennis went, "Oh no, this wasn't a good idea, was it?"
I'll have another double gin.
And he says, and Vera says, "Not for me," and Dagmar says, "Not for me." And he says, "Well, I'll have one." So they go back, they cut back to the hut, and Bomber and Oz are in the hut, and Bomber says, you know, he says, "You're all right, Oz, you're back early." And he says, "Yeah, I had to see some mates. They had to drive back to Essen." And Bomber says, "I'm going over the club for a jar. Are you coming?" And Oz says, "I'll follow you across. I'm just going to sort this boot out. There's a nail in me foot." And he says, "I'll see you later, and I'll not be long." And Oz looks at the table and something on the table. And he picks
those lovely little squares,
and Oz eats a portion of the rat poison. And so they
back in the hotel room, aren't they?
Yeah, they cut back to the hotel. And again, you know, Vera has reverted to her factory setting of being a fucking twat. And so Dennis, you know, she, like, can you imagine? So they've been out for a meal, and like Vera's been queen bitch, turned it up to level 11. And so could you imagine sitting there eating your meal, like with a fucking filthy, hacky looks that are being cast upon?
Well, her nose has been put out of joint when truly, hasn't it?
Like, you know, instead of being dignified about it, she's obviously gone out of her way to spoil it as best you possibly can. You know what I mean? They are, like, honestly, just not a nice person. And they get back to the room, and Dennis is like, "Okay, out with it. What's the matter?" "Nothing." And he says, "Look, that was an excellent restaurant, that. You hardly ate a thing, and you said even less." And she's not feeling very well. Must have been the flight. You know, I don't like flying. Anyway, you and Dagmar could have stayed. And he was, "Oh, of course we couldn't have stayed." And she says, "Don't you normally stay with her?" And he says, "What's that remark supposed to mean?" And she goes, "Just drop it, Dennis." And he goes, "No, I won't." And she goes, "I'm tired." He goes, "You're upset. you're upset because I brought Dagmar. And this is where she breaks and she admits it. She goes, yes, I'm upset because you brought Dagmar. Sometimes you can be, and he goes, I can be what? And she goes, you can be really insensitive about how other people feel. He can be insensitive about other people, but you're the one that sent his kids off with your boyfriend when he was back from Germany, and you're saying that he can be insensitive. What? Queen of the insensitive twats. And she goes, you get an idea in your head and you've got to see it through. And he goes, look, and she goes, but you don't always think it through. And he goes, listen, I know what's going on in your life, right? And I want you to know the same about me. I just want you to know the way things are. And she goes, you don't know the way things are. And he goes, oh, really? Come on, then inform me then. And she goes, don't get angry. And he goes, I'm not getting angry, man. Confused, maybe. Mm-hmm. Look, she goes, I didn't come over here to sort things out. I could have done that on the phone. I came over here because our divorce isn't final yet. He goes, I know it's not. And then she drops the bomb. She says, well, I'm not sure I want it to be. And he goes, and he's like, what? And he goes, now look, just wait a minute. This divorce was your idea, if I remember correctly. She goes, I know it was, and I know it hurt you. Well, it hurt your pride anyway. And again, she's trying to be sorry, and she can't even stop being bitchy when she's saying sorry. And he says there were good and she goes, and there were good reasons for a split up, very good reasons. But she goes, look, I don't want to go through it all that again. He says, well, Vera, I wish I knew what you did want. And she goes, I don't want a divorce. I want you to come home. He goes, oh, bloody hell. Then she goes, fancy a drink. I've got some duty-free
gin.
Glasses. So her solution is to try and ply him with neat gin in order to get him pissed and all that. So, yeah, I mean, just, you know, where she gets the fucking front, I've got no idea. You know what I mean? She's kicked him to the curb. She's treated him like utter shite.
I would have told her to start off at that point.
Oh, yeah, I'd have been like, oh, you want to get fucked, love. I mean, look, is it as simple? No, you know, they've got children and what have you, but, you know, she has been a very, very horrible person during this entire process. And, just, you know, she, you know, how she thought. She, you know, she's talking about she goes, you know, when you've got an idea in your head, you've got to see it through and all that. I'm like, well, what, like you've just done by coming to Germany and getting the hump and that and being a twat. You know what I mean? And again, you know, she goes, you get an idea in your head and you've got to see it through, but you always don't think it through. Like you have just, what an absolute fucking bitch, I swear to God. And, so anyway, we cut back to the hut.
In the hut.
And they're having a wee chat. And Barry, again, talking about haute cuisine, he's like, there's a tin of pilchards here, if anyone wants one, and some Toblerone. And Bomber says, I think I'll pass on that combination. And then Moxie starts dreaming about fish and chips. He says, fish and chips, that's what I fancy now. You know, real English fish and chips wrapped in the Sunday Mirror with loads of vinegar. And Den says, and Neville says, Den will have some stuff from Brenda when he gets back. And this is where Oz reveals, he says, well, them little fancies from your Brenda. And Fancy says, the little hard things. They were lying on the
square things, yeah.
And obviously they all realise he's talking about the rat poison. And Moxie goes, what, the square ones, like? He goes, aye, tasted a bit queer. And Neville says, you ate one, like, did you? And he goes, aye, well, just one. Because you didn't mind, did you? They were only little. And he goes, no. And Barry's like, you're feeling all right, Oz? Like, in yourself? He goes, champion? He goes, mind. God, I've got a raging thirst. And his bottle of beer. So they cut to the bar. And Dennis is sat at the bar on his own. And you can hear the noise of a taxi, you know, pulling away. And Wayne enters the bar. And Wayne says, I'll have a large cognac, please, Chief. And then he sees Dennis in the corner and he says, all right, Dennis, what are you doing here? And Dennis is obviously already 3 sheets to the wind.
Yeah, I think the old gin had taken the effect. Yeah.
And he says, nightcap. And And he says, yeah, me too. Do you want another? He goes, Scotch, please. He says, that's a large Scotch too, please, Squire. And he goes, I thought you were staying out all night. And Dennis says, no, changed my mind. And he says, things not work out with Dagmar and your old lady then. Shakes, he says, I thought I was just being above board, you know, straight and honest. Vera said I was showing off. And Wayne says, showing off? And he goes, aye, showing off, Dagmar. I mean, she's a smart lassie, ain't she? Attractive and honest. I don't know. That's probably what I was doing, which, you know, he probably was. He was like, you know, obviously last time he went home, she was like, you know, Vera was an absolute twat. And he's like, aha, look at this. And Wayne says, you know, he says, well, she's rather special, that Dagmar, isn't she? Mind you, so is her mate. And Dennis says, Krista. Hey, he says, me and you, we've collared the clerical stuff, haven't we, yeah? He says, I wish I had, Den. And he says, no, things not work out like. He says, well, she wouldn't let me get near her, would she? Mind you, I didn't want to, you know. I didn't want to come on strong and jump it like. And Dennis says, hey, you're slipping, aren't you? And he says, I'm smitten, Den. Now, listen, don't tell the lads, right? He says, I can confide in you, Connor. Now, I know you've probably got your own problems and all that, but I can bend your ear for a bit, can't I? And Dennis, pissed, he says, just carry on, Bonnie lad, I'm going to care about the world, mate. He says, yeah, well, look, he says, I'm serious about this, Krista, right? I know it's madness, but I'm really bowled over. Now, don't tell the lads. And he goes, my lips are sealed, all right? And he says, I get embarrassed just thinking about it, you know? And he goes, it'll never happen to me, I said. It bloody has, ain't it? And Dennis says, hey. And Dennis realizes that he's telling the truth. He says, hey, you really are serious, aren't you? And Wayne says, I'm deadly serious, Den, of course. He says, I've never haven't been in this situation before. It's pretty hard to be certain about the symptoms. But I think, well, listen, I'm positive, Sunbeam, that this is it. It's devastating, mate, devastating. Dennis says, aye, it's not the end of the world, that man, go for it. And Wayne says, yeah, he says, but I can't fathom it, can I? He says, and the trouble is, we're shitting out you, ain't we? Dennis says, so, and he says, well, I've got to decide whether to go home or chance me arm here, ain't I? And Dennis says, you're not the only one that's got to make that decision. And Wayne, shocked, he says, you too? He's like, and Wayne says, what, you mean home or Dagmar? And Dennis shakes, he goes, no, I mean Vera. And Wayne says, blimey, Dennis, what are we going to do? And what a fantastic line to finish off. And Dennis just turns around and he says, well, I was about to get pissed. Would you better join me? They both laugh. And that is the end of the episode. And what a fantastic episode it was too. Yeah. So credits were obviously Dagmar, Krista, Vera, Brenda, and the barman. So like I said, don't forget. Well, I did actually have a look, and Vera had 20 credits on IMDb, including Grange Hill, When the Boat Comes In, Wurzel Gummidge, and she was also in the film Dandy.
When the Boat Comes In was a brilliant series.
Absolutely, yeah. And I also looked up Brenda on IMDb, but she's obviously not a major, like that wasn't a career. It was maybe an actress, was a bit of a side hustle. She only had like a couple of credits on IMDb. But that was the penultimate episode of series 1. So next week is the final episode of series 1. So if in the interim period you have anything that you would like to say to me or George about this episode or any other episode of Auf Wiedersehen Again podcast, please do feel free to email us on aufwiedersehenagain@gmail.com. Please do follow us on Instagram @Auf Wiedersehen Again podcast, Twitter @Auf Again. Please do like and share the Facebook page Auf Wiedersehen Again podcast, and please do go to the YouTube channel of Wiedersehen Again podcast. Please do subscribe to the YouTube channel and click that bell. And we are on all good audio podcast platforms: Spotify, iTunes, and Google Podcast Breaker, and many, many more. New episodes are released every Friday at 10 a.m. and our theme music is composed and performed by the guitar man Lee Dosky. So please do like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Remember, we are sponsored by Top Gun Tattooing, number 12, the Harris Arcade in Reading, topguntattoo.co.uk, 01189 968 667. And remember, all of our listeners get a 20% discount of any tattoo from Zach with the code word Hadaway and Shiteman. And remember, every listener is entitled to a free Neville and Lottie tattoo. And remember, we are in the middle of the giveaway for the Jimmy Nail book. So you need to go to the social medias. You need to follow us on social media, like the post, tag 3 friends, and share that post. So share it on Facebook, retweet it on Twitter, and share it to your story on Instagram, and tag us in the story. And that is it for episode 12. So next week, episode 13 is the final episode of series.
Yeah.
George, we're here. We've done series 1 already. Look, absolutely amazing.
Almost made it through, yeah.
Almost. And so next week there is some entertainment with Oz, but also we see the return of McGowan. Oh, until next week, George.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Auf Wiedersehen Pet.
Oh, yeah, man. All out of options, nothing to choose. I've been out on Netflix, I'm sick of the news. I'd sign up to Sky, but I don't want to pay. I've been on furlough since May. Now we'll go and listen to a Cockney attitude.